You didn't just lose to Trump. You built the stage, handed him the mic, and begged him not to be mean. You let him spit in your face and called it political discourse. You acted shocked every time he did exactly what he said he'd do, like a battered spouse begging their abuser to stop yelling, like a hostage asking politely to loosen the ropes. You thought calling out hypocrisy would matter to people who feed on it. You thought telling the truth would win because you believed you were still in a debate. But you weren't. You were in a hostage video and you still thought quoting the Constitution would save you. Welcome to the Ministry of Fuck You, where we break the news gently with a sledgehammer. This is how Trump won. A 7-part exorcism for the people who thought manners could stop a monster. You want to scream? Good. Do it in the comments, where it counts. They baited you with psychotic tweets. You took the bait every single time. They screamed civil war, and you replied, that's not civil. They didn't want discourse. They wanted chaos, and you handed it to them on a handcrafted, sustainably sourced platter. MAGA didn't outwit you. They studied narcissistic abuse and ran it like a campaign strategy. Step 1. Provoke. Step 2. Play the victim. Step 3. Weaponize your overreaction as proof, and you oblige them. Like a trauma-bonded ex hoping this time they won't snap. They ran psyops. You ran town halls. They dropped propaganda. You fact-checked tone. You weren't prepared for a psychological war. You were prepared for a podcast debate. You didn't just get played. You rehearsed for the role. And when the manipulation worked, you said, this isn't who we are. But yes, it is. You just didn't realize how easy you were to manipulate. They handed you a script and you read every line. They made you dance. And you called it resistance. Every time you screamed back, they clipped it, posted it, and raised more money. They weren't trying to govern. They were trying to dominate. They didn't want your approval. They wanted your fear. And you gave it to them in high definition. Remember when everything was fascism? Every executive order, every press conference, every Fox News segment, you labeled it all the end of democracy until the actual end showed up and no one noticed. You cried wolf so many times people stopped looking at the forest. You flooded the zone with panic. You buried the signal under an avalanche of drama. So when they stormed the Capitol, the country shrugged. You had already worn them out. The enemy didn't get smarter. You just got louder. And when everything is a 5-alarm fire, nobody grabs a hose. You mistook volume for action. You thought if you just screamed danger loud enough, the fascists would feel embarrassed. They didn't. You cried yourself hoarse, and they danced in the ashes. Oh. You turned political activism into a performance, and forgot that most of the country doesn't care about your moral theater. You hashtagged your way through a war zone. You branded your fear. You sold outrage like merch, and the algorithm thanked you. But no one else did. You made fascism go viral by reacting to it nonstop. You didn't fight fire with fire. You gave fire more oxygen. You clung to your pocket constitution like a toddler clutching a stuffed animal. They brought gallows. You brought Hamilton lyrics. You thought decency would stop people who have none. You treated Congress like a church. They treated it like a hostage situation. They broke windows. You wrote op-eds. They plotted sedition. You quoted founding fathers. They wore tactical vests. You believed in process. They believed in power. You showed up in good faith to a cage match. You brought decency to a knife fight and called it courage. They laughed while you cried decorum. And when they kicked in the doors, You quoted rules of order like that meant something to the mob. It didn't. They weren't there for governance. They were there for conquest. You kept thinking someone would step in, the courts, the press, the voters, anyone, but you didn't realize they already had. And they chose him. Again. You weren't just naive. You were willfully blind. You called that hope. We call it negligence. They knew exactly what they were doing. They screamed madness and then played victim when you flinched. The narcissist's favorite move: push you to the edge, then sob when you react. And you? You fell for it, again, and again, and again. You knew the tactics. You've seen the TikToks. You've reposted the trauma recovery threads. But when Trump insulted a reporter, a woman, a grieving family, a war hero, an entire ethnic group, you reacted exactly as they wanted, and gave them fuel. You let them bait your dignity and then weaponize your pain. You played the script like an understudy in a high school drama. They punched. You cried. They smeared. You explained. They lied. You cited sources. You weren't silenced. You were scripted. And they used your integrity as proof of their persecution. You thought logic would save you. You thought empathy would change them. You thought if you were decent enough, calm enough, human enough, they'd come around. But they weren't confused. They weren't ignorant. They weren't misinformed. They were cruel on purpose. And you kept inviting them to the table, like a cult deprogrammer trying to save people who never wanted to be saved. They didn't need more facts. They needed power. And they got it, because you gave it to them. They called your children pedophiles. They called your trans friends predators. They mocked your grief, your families, your losses. They filmed Paul Pelosi getting beaten and made it a meme. They turned Hunter's addiction into blood sport. And your response? Politeness. Caution. We can't stoop to their level. They weaponized shame. You internalized it. You let them use your children, your community, your trauma as rhetorical meat. And you still held back. Still hoped decency would prevail. You called it grace. We call it cowardice. You wanted to look strong without ever being mean. You thought moral superiority would protect you. But it didn't. Because they weren't interested in your principles. They were interested in your submission. And you gave it to them every time you flinched. You kept voting. They kept rigging. You told yourself, the system will correct itself. Like someone waiting for an apology from a brick wall. You clung to democracy like a battered spouse clings to the wedding vows, long after the beating started. They gerrymandered your districts. You filed lawsuits. They purged the voter rolls. You wrote petitions. They passed rifles. You passed resolutions. You kept believing the scoreboard mattered, while they set the field on fire. You voted like the rules still applied. They cheated like the refs worked for them. And now they do. But hope is a hell of a drug, and you overdosed on it while they emptied the safe. Not because you were outnumbered, because you were outwilled. They broke laws. You filed paperwork. They stormed state houses. You tweeted. They plotted coups. You posted memes. They treated democracy like a failed state. You treated it like a classroom debate. They weren't hiding who they weren't subtle. They told you again and again. And you still believed you could reason with a dumpster fire. Now the fire has a throne. And you handed it the crown. Don't agree? Then prove you didn't help. We'll be waiting in the comments. But this time, try bringing more than vibes. This has been the Ministry of Fuck You, your regularly scheduled ego death. You're welcome.